Hello, my name is Renee Peters, and I'm the social work intern at the Institute for Practical Life. Today, I wanted to talk to you guys about something very serious: suicide. As we continue to navigate our way through the uncertainty of a global pandemic, we've become more aware of some physical kind of outcomes and symptoms of COVID-19. So we know about the cough, we know about the fever. We aren't talking enough about some of the symptoms and consequences that are going unseen, such as mental health, suicidal ideation, depression, loneliness, and all of these feelings that aren't so easily recognizable to the naked eye as it is if you see someone coughing down the street. And that is why we wanted to bring to you this presentation that sheds light on not only suicide, but gives us a path towards preventing it. Statistics also show that about 15% of high school students seriously consider committing suicide, and about 12% have a plan as to how they would attempt suicide. About a little more than 8% have attempted suicide one or more times, and we've seen that about 2.4% have made a suicide attempt that resulted in a serious injury, poisoning, or an overdose that resulted in medical attention. Again, these statistics are very alarming and just goes to show that there is such a need for suicide prevention and education for everyone, but especially with an emphasis on of young people. And our purpose in creating this infomercial about suicide and suicide prevention is essentially just one to recognize that it is a leading cause amongst deaf people, and it's something that is preventable and needs to be addressed. And there needs to be more of an effort to combat this issue. Also, again, realize that it is an ethical responsibility for us to be proactive rather than reactive in attempting to prevent suicide, which means learning more about it, means workshops, seminars, more education to the public, more education for students in schools, high schools, middle schools, so forth. And then lastly, to help develop a crisis plan if we do spot someone who we may think has been contemplating suicide, and how to move going forward, how to navigate that, resources that you can help, and just kind of develop a plan so if we do find ourselves in this situation, we're not caught blindly and we have a sort of general basic knowledge in our repertoire to help us deal with the situation. When learning and talking about suicide, it's very important to look at the risk factors of it. And a risk factor refers to something, whether it be a characteristic or an experience, that if someone has lived through them, it puts them at a higher risk. So we take those very seriously. If someone has attempted suicide in the past, you definitely want to be very mindful of that and kind of on high alert, because that is a precursor for attempting suicide again. Self-harm or injury is also a big risk factor. So even if they don't have the intent to die, something such as like cutting one's wrist would be a risk factor for suicide, and it's something that could definitely escalate. Some other risk factors include access to lethal means. So, for instance, if someone does have access to a gun in their home, if they have access to prescription drugs or pills that they can overdose on. Substance abuse is a risk factor. Depressive disorders, mood disorders, those who have experienced PTSD, and unfortunately members of the LGBTQ community are also at high risk. And so for some of the risk factors we have for this include feelings of loneliness, social isolation, helplessness. On the other hand, we also have something that we like to call protective factors, and they are kind of like the opposite of risk factors. They are environmental factors, conditions, experiences that an individual has that can actually lower their chances of thinking about committing suicide or ultimately committing suicide. So some of those include a strong family and social support system. That's always important. Just feeling like they're not alone, they have someone to talk to, a good, strong relationship there is essential. Having a good sense of spirituality and faith also is a huge protective factor that can really kind of like hone in on someone and help them feel like they have that support as well to kind of help them battle these suicidal thoughts and tendencies. Resilience is another really important thing, and that's kind of like just the continuing sense of hope in the face of adversity. And so having effective coping skills, realizing that, okay, like something bad did happen, but it's not the end of the world, that you can get help. There's always another way out. Also like having a positive self-image, self-esteem, body image, all of that is important. Having good, healthy psychological and emotional well-being, having a positive mood and mindset is very important, as well as frequent and vigorous participation in sports and exercise. These have all been proven to be protective factors for youth who may be at risk for attempting suicide. And of course, you can't talk about protective factors and risk factors without talking about the very serious warning signs of someone who may be suicidal. And if you or anyone you know or yourself has experienced any of the warning signs I am about to disclose, it is always number one priority: seek help immediately. Call 911. If you're in a situation, if you're in school, if it's with younger people, find an adult, call a healthcare provider, get help immediately. And some of these warning signs are someone verbally outright just threatening to kill themselves, someone who is actively seeking for methods to complete suicide, so that includes looking for pills, weapons, and so forth, someone who is constantly talking about dying and death and suicide when it's not something that they usually do before. If like something happens and now they're talking about wanting to die very often, like that's often a very serious warning sign. In any of these circumstances, we always reiterate, do not leave that person alone. Obviously, try to get help. And so if it has to be calling 911 for your phone, screaming out for help, or finding someone else who could maybe run and get help while you stay with the person. Those are all really important things to remember. There's also different types of threats. So there are direct threats saying like, I am going to kill myself, I want to kill myself. But then there's also more passive ones that just feel like, again, relating back to the loneliness, the lack of finding hope or reasoning. It's kind of just like, what's the point? Well, maybe things would be better if I wasn't around. I just want it all to stop. I want the pain to stop. Things like that are always red flags and big warning signs that someone may be contemplating committing suicide. Some other warning signs to look after include the act of making final arrangements. So if the person starts to give away their belongings, they write goodbye letters, they do kind of things that are sentimental that would indicate like something is going to happen, those are always a huge issue. And that also comes hand in hand with someone who may have a plan. So if someone discloses that they might be suicidal and you ask them about it and they say, yes, I would do X and Y on this date to commit suicide, that's a very serious warning sign and flag, and that would be something to warrant, again, calling help immediately, whether it be the person's parents, calling 911. And again, especially being wary of all of these and when they seem to be more sudden changes. So the person just, if they have gone through something traumatic or a negative experience and they start to withdraw and they start to isolate themselves, whereas they didn't before, personality starts to change. If their mood, their behavior, if there's a dramatic shift, they seem more irrational, things like that are all red flags and things to be wary of possibly attempting suicide. And here I want to show you some common myths about suicide. The first and most important, I think, to address is the myth that talking about suicide may encourage someone to commit suicide. And that is absolutely not true. Talking about suicide provides the opportunity for communication, to open up this window, to have someone disclose that they need help and help them receive the help they may be searching for. And that is, again, a main goal in talking about this and having this presentation infomercial, to have us be able to talk about what it is, what signs to look for, and some ways to try to aid in the prevention effort of suicide.